you for letting me do this. This is awesome. I feel like a lot of students don't get the opportunity to do this, and I'm glad that you guys are willing to listen. And to begin with, like I said, I'm a second year medical student, but I have experienced burnout very severely. I was in the BSMD program, so I finished undergrad in 2 years, and that, as it sounds, was pretty horrible. But I think that the student perspective is actually fairly straightforward to understand, but I think you need to understand it in a little bit more broken down way. So I hope that this perspective is insightful to you. And if you have any questions or anything along the way, please don't hesitate to ask or anything. So to begin with, I feel like a lot of us are familiar with what burnout is, and that is just the state of exhaustion or up till collapse caused by overwork or stress. And the three main features that we define it with is emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced sense of achievement or accomplishment in what you do. And there's an analogy for burnout, or people's response to burnout that I really liked. And it's if a person or a friend of yours just comes up to you and says, I'm going to run 50 miles and refuse to eat, sleep, or take care of myself until I'm done. Well, any rational person is going to say, no, that's a horrible idea. Don't do that. But what medical students or medical schools and institutions have been doing is they say, no, that's a horrible idea, but wait, you need sunscreen first. So that's like a pretty common misconception on how the reactions are different. So barriers that not just I see, but I've kind of pulled in my whole demographic a little bit. I'm from Columbus, so I have some connections with the students there as well, and kind of to get a wide perspective on what it's like to be a medical student overall. And of course, the first thing is, I'm gonna get it out of the way, is the growing debt. Everyone's familiar with how the price of medical school just keeps climbing, and it's not just by like a marginal amount, it's by thousands of dollars every year. And there's very little financial forgiveness unless you take, I guess, three main pathways now. It's the urban medical pathway, the rural pathway, and if you join the Army. And those are the main ones, but that's not always everyone's cup of tea, so that's a little difficult. It's actually not the majority's cup of tea, believe it or not. And the isolating environment. I feel like people think since we're students, we are working towards a common goal, so we see each other and work together a lot. This is a very common misconception because medical students socialize a lot less than you think. School itself is very exhausting, so people often ask, where do we find the motive and the energy to, I guess, meet up and do more things outside of it? And not everyone's pace in studying is the same. And you don't want to jeopardize your studying methods by working with other people that don't study the same way as you do. And a big thing is altered support sources when you move to a different place. A lot of students are from out of state / I'm from Columbus, and even this is different for me. I'm from the city, and this is obviously a very isolated area. So that was difficult for me, and I know that's difficult for a lot of students who have to move far away from home. And that's especially hard for introverted students who have to create new social ties and create a whole new support system that they're not familiar with. A big thing that I've noticed in just pattern-wise is how a lot of schools, they think that having no leniency is the best way to foster professionalism, which is interesting because I understand what that concept is. At the same time, that can be a slippery slope. So there's that idea of that students actually don't get personal days off. It sounds like we do. Like they say, of course, if you're sick, take the day off, but that's not without having makeup work being built up every single day. So people will just get scared and refuse to do that as a way of not having more work pile up. Versus if you're a resident, you can kind of maybe have someone take your responsibilities for the day, and you can kind of get away with that a little bit. But if you're a student, you don't really have someone else who's going to study for you. So it seems like that would be a nice thing to have, but it's not an option, unfortunately. And another thing is the idea of a rigid hierarchy. Everyone's pretty familiar with workplace hierarchy and just social hierarchies, but students are objectively kind of at the lower end of this hierarchy in medical schools, and that's understandable. Like, we're here to learn, and we're learning from experts, that's the whole point. But there's also the idea that comes with, if you're at the bottom of the hierarchy, you feel inferior, and you feel like your voice isn't going to be taken seriously just naturally, or you're not going to be heard at all. And there's something that I learned recently called relational distance. And it's just the idea that people at the top of this hierarchy, they can't really understand the experiences of people at the bottom because they're so far removed from it. And there's so many tiers separating them that it's just almost impossible for them to realize what the people at the bottom of the hierarchy are going through. And as that distance increases, it's even between patients and physicians now sometimes, where there's so many other people in between this process that sometimes it's hard to communicate properly and understand what each other's needs are. And one more thing that I wanted to add is that students don't actually have that much control over their pathway through medical school in particular. And even more so than regular grad schools, they have to follow the rules set place by committees that don't really represent them. It's not other students or other people that went through medical school oftentimes, it's just board members. And I think that a lot of people will not be able to understand the particular stigma in school unless they actually are going through or went through it recently. And the idea that obviously demands are always increasing, but a common feeling is that you're only going to get respect if you do well. And it's not just if you're doing anything at all, if you're trying. And if you're also not doing something school related, then you're not doing something right. Like you're going to be guilty in the idea that you're not doing something to build your CV constantly. So anything outside of that, whether it's for you or not, it's kind of inherently shameful. And I know we try to break that stigma down, encourage people to practice mindfulness a lot, but that's still a little bit hard when you have a rigorous curriculum overall, and that demands of residency saying you have to have a properly built CV, and that's for any job in general. So there's this figure that I found in a study, and I linked the study at the end of this presentation, but it was showcasing just how levels of burnout / symptoms of burnout show up in students in a particular school. And it is a school in the United States, so it's still relevant. But so it says like year 1 to year 4. Year 4 is roughly where they applied and matched for residency. And the triangle line is the line that showcases burnout. If you can see where it peaks is around between like year 1 and year 2, which is where I experienced it mostly. And it was also prior to taking your first step 1 exam. So that's when everything kind of tanks for most people. But also surprisingly, the fact that even when they're reaching the end, they're still feeling really burnt out. But like levels are up to 60%. And you just kind of have to think about the workforce that the schools are churning out. If almost 60% of their students are feeling burnt out. And that's really concerning, because if those symptoms and those problems aren't acknowledged early on, then that's only going to persist in the workplace. And that's not going to bode well for their patients at all. Oh, and how it just said that, so how burnout seems overall these days, I don't know, I thought this made sense. Just feels inevitable for anyone in any workplace. So some final points that I wanted to kind of suggest maybe throughout, and this is some feedback from my fellow classmates as well. I don't want you to just assume it's my perspective, but a lot of it might be just me too. But to begin with, if you want to help a student maybe who's going through burnout, you're noticing this, is hopefully you learn to treat them. If you have patients or familiar with patients, then treat them like they're a patient / just maybe a friend or anything. And you have to avoid victim blaming. Above everything is to say that the burnout is not the student's fault. And that's hard for a lot of people to understand, is that there is a lot of victim blaming in cases of burnout. And that's not how it should be, just overall, because it's an institutional result. It's not just one person's mistake. And when I say encouragement, so encouragement just doesn't mean to, I guess, tell them to achieve more. It means to reiterate what they've already achieved. So that is the kind of encouragement I think a lot of people in general could use, is to know that what they've done up till this point is impressive and that they did a lot to get to that point. And that encouragement sometimes doesn't feel as given in medical school settings. They talk about what you need to achieve to do more, to where you need to get to, but it's really impressive that a lot of students are here, and it's impressive what they've done to get here. And that's not something that people say that often. And one thing that is not talked about as much is sleep health. So they say like, yeah, you need to sleep well, you need to get 8 hours, 9 hours, but how many people are actually doing that? They're not. And there's a reason for it, but we don't talk about the reasoning behind it. We just say to do it, and that's not going to address the issue here. So I think we need to have more education on what proper sleep health means and how to deal with it if you don't have proper sleep health. That was actually one of my biggest barriers is I didn't know how to approach sleep health. I've never known anything about it slash understood what having poor sleep health was like until medical school. So a big thing, and we always talk about it, is empathy is also a part of it is sharing your own experiences. I do believe a lot of people in today's workforce, they experience burnout to an extent, or at least a symptom or two of it. And the only way that we're going to get past the stigma of it is to share our stories and to showcase it's not a weakness. So when I say leniency on people that are going through work burnout of any kind is I kind of give it a little example in a story that I experienced is one of the physicians I was shadowing, he's a wonderful family physician in the area. And I guess he didn't know, I wasn't doing anything weird or like I wasn't sick or anything, but he really understood what it was like to be a medical student. So he was like, you know what, like I've been in your shoes and I know that I can honestly tell you, like, you're probably not fully taking care of yourself. So there are no particularly interesting patients. They're just like diabetes and blood pressure checkups for the rest of the afternoon. So I want you to go home and take care of yourself. And that was like, I almost cried. I was so happy just because that was like a leniency I didn't expect, but I really needed at the time. And that single-handedly helped me keep going and have like a little bit more faith in humanity, to be honest. So it's kind of anticipating someone's needs, but not just, kind of giving them shortcuts. It's just kind of telling them you can take time for yourself, and I understand that's okay. So again, thank you for giving me the platform to share. That really meant a lot. And I have a few discussion questions if anyone wants to pitch in or share experiences, or if you have any other ideas. So to begin with, what questions do you have for me? I know that, like Nicole said, it's not